I was just looking at my eyes. I just want to show you my eyes first, so um, you don't see me like this right away. I'm just wearing these because I think, an injury to this eye or an infection. Something's going on with this eye, and it has it inflamed, and I'm light sensitive at the moment. So I have to go and see the ophthalmologist tomorrow in Waterford. So I'm just going to put these on. In this video, I'm going to be discussing slavery. Modern day slavery has been depicted as an unfair state of being, almost a form of imprisonment, a form of imprisonment. And true slavery, at least biblical slavery, is not that at all. Biblical slavery is different to people's being forced into labour, which is hard and inhumane. There's no measure of force involved, at least as the Bible describes slavery. Slavery can be that, but there are forms of slavery which are actually fair. Now, let's discuss that, because in Ireland today, I believe that the Irishman is in a state of unfair slavery, which actually renders him less than a slave in his own land. Biblical slavery is the upfront payment to a household, to a homestead, to a family, for one of their siblings or children and their labour until the debt is paid. So if I sold you into slavery in biblical times, I would get money for selling you, and then you'd work for the person who bought you until you paid the debt. But you'd work for that person, and once your debt was cleared, you could leave. Oftentimes, such good rapport and such good relationship was built up that they wouldn't leave. They'd remain. And they would work for that person and continue to. And oftentimes, they would work until the debt was paid, and they would have helped that person so much to grow their farm and their homestead that they would be given livestock to fund or start their own homestead and their own farm. Quite amazing, isn't it? So traditional slavery is a much better scenario than what the Irishman now has. And I want to elaborate on that a bit. What's up with the weather? It's raining here, but I have these on to protect my eyes. I have a pain in my eye, so I'm light sensitive at the moment. Now, traditionally in the Bible, what's said is that slaves were sold into slavery, and the amount of money that they were paid up front would be recouped by the buyer, and then the slave was free to go. So all it was a contract that you would work for that person till you cleared your debt. That's it. Which is fair, right? And the money that you got for your father or whoever sold you into slavery would keep their homestead afloat. Because the reality was that maybe they had a daughter working on the farm and the daughter got bought. And whilst the dad would receive an amount of money, it wouldn't really cover indefinitely or in perpetuity the labour of the daughter, the value of her hands on his farm. So they might have been in a position where they were a pair of hands down and they couldn't keep things really going themselves. Maybe the dad was getting too old. You have all these considerations. And the son couldn't work the farm on his own. Whatever was happening, there might have been many different dynamics. The person would be sold into slavery and they would work for another person, and the money that they got would keep them afloat. But then they could return to the dad once the debt was paid, if he was still in the land of the living. Okay, so what's happening in Ireland now is much worse than slavery. Much, much worse. Even the black man who worked on the plantation in America, and this is not so long ago, it's less than 200 years ago, maybe even less than 100. They were working as slaves, but they had bed and board and they had their own families and place to put them. Now, there was a lot of abuse, I'd imagine, going on as well, but there were obviously, I would say, a lot of good relationships also. I'd say there were some good relationships. Now, these men, at least they had their own houses. In Ireland, they're not even being paid gainful employment. They're not even being given a fair wage, let alone upfront money. It's almost unheard of nowadays that you'll be paid in advance for your work. Unless you have some kind of materials cost, you might get part payment to cover them. But in most cases, you do the work before you get paid. It wasn't accommodating at all. The old world seemed to be much more accommodating, and the infrastructure designed to keep everybody afloat. Nowadays, it's dog eat dog. Because the Freemasons got at the helm of the ship, they got into government and they destroyed the well-functioning policies which were preserving the common good. Because they're basically barbarians in suits. Because of who they serve, their father, the devil. And it's much easier to hide your barbaric nature if you talk with an accent and wear a suit. But they're brutes. So, speaking from this point of view, speaking about the definition of slavery, Ireland is in a worse state now than slavery. The devil has the man underpaid, the woman at work, and the child in the creche being pumped full of ungodly doctrine. The local transvestite comes down to talk to the children in the youth club to totally debase them. Or they'll meet down the park for a picnic, a tranny picnic. How pervert is that? How perverse is that? 20, 30 years ago, that was limited to the George in Dublin. Now they're trying to force it down the children's neck. The devil with his bunny costume on. The point I'm making is this, that slavery, years and years ago, was fair. But the state that the Irishman is in today is criminal, and it's a crime against humanity. It is so unconstitutional that you would reckon the Constitution is in their laboratory. They care so little about it that they might as well use it as toilet paper. The minimum wage in Ireland is gainful employment. Let that sink in. Minimum wage in Ireland is gainful employment. How do we know this? Let's look to the Constitution. The government must endeavour to ensure that it never be as a result of economic necessity that the woman leaves the house and goes to work. Again, the government must endeavour to ensure that it never be as a result of economic necessity that the woman leaves the house and goes to work. What does that mean? Let's make our deductions. If the woman's not at work, her money has to come from somewhere else. Where does it come from? Now note, it says the government must endeavour to ensure, but we're not reasoning that the government should pay for the woman unless she can't get the money from somewhere else. But it is ultimately their responsibility. If everything else, every other avenue fails, it is the government's responsibility to ensure that Mammy doesn't have to go to work. And this is whether she's married or not. This is not limited to single women. It doesn't say single women in the Constitution. Let that sink in. So it's very important that they pay the man enough so that the government don't have to fork out money for every household in Ireland, so that the mother doesn't have to go to work. Because that's what they could soon find themselves doing. So which one is more preferable? Make sure the man has gainful employment, or pay all the women money so that they don't have to go to work? The government must endeavour to ensure that it never be as a result of economic necessity that the woman leaves the house and goes to work. So which is it? You're going to pay the man enough, or is the government going to pay the woman? Because they're the two options, right? So because it's obviously not the ideal that the government is paying every household so that the woman can stay home, it must be implied that the man receive gainful employment as a result of the enshrined right of the woman. So the implied right of the man is gainful employment. What is gainful employment? He used to be called the breadwinner. What is the breadwinner? The breadwinner is the one that pays for the house. A singular entity, a singular person, the breadwinner. It was known, it was the norm, it still is. It was constitutional, it still is. But you have these tyrants serving Satan and Freemasonry, infiltrating government to ensure that the man doesn't receive gainful employment, so the woman has to go to work so that the child can be cornered in the creche. Because the child's the future, and that's the mind of the future that the devil is trying to infiltrate by way of not paying daddy enough, making sure mammy's not there to mind the child and protect their little minds, and then cornering the baby down the creche. So because all of these things are already employed, now is the time to catch the thief red-handed. And we have the Constitution to do it. You don't act too soon, and you don't act too late. You act just at the right time, when the child and the boy already has his hand in the cookie jar. Well, Satan well and truly has his hand in the cookie jar now. So that's the time when you come and expose him before God. The government must endeavour to ensure that it never be as a result of economic necessity that the woman leaves the house and goes to work. That's not acceptable, that the woman would leave the house and go to work and abandon her children in their formative years needing guidance. It's un-Irish. It's unacceptable. So, because it requires to treat a man less than a slave, it's a crime against humanity. You must give a man a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. That has to be established by a standard. It's not merely a numerical value. It's not merely a number, because numbers can vary, and inflation and fluctuations in the cost of living. So the cost of living has to be tracked. And so you have to have a reasonable sized family, which would be, say, 4 people. You'd say 4 people is a reasonable sized family. I'm talking about 4 children and 2 parents. Not 2 parents and 2 children. If you have 2 parents and 2 children, the population stagnates, but you've been led to believe that that would be a good thing for you. It's not a good thing for you. It's not a good thing. If you have 2 parents and you have 2 children, when those parents die, they only left 2 people after them. If they then have 1 child, the population is decreasing. It's actually plummeting very, very quickly. Now, if you convince enough young people that they can't afford to have children, that's a quicker way to genocide than actually killing the people. It's a quicker way to removing Irish people than shooting them all dead. It's not only quicker, but it's easier. So if you can convince people not to have children, that's a more powerful weapon than having to go in and kill them all, like Hitler tried to do to the Jews, according to history. I wasn't there. But the point is this, that slavery is something much misunderstood. A slave is somebody who gets paid fairly, traditionally, in the biblical context. But they led you to believe that slavery is something far worse than what you're going through, so that you feel that you're better than a slave. But you're worse than a slave, because a slave gets a fair pay. You think about it in biblical terms. You're sold into slavery, but the person that sells you in gets an amount of money up front. That might have been your family member. Then you go away to work off the debt, and then you're free to go. So you were able to get money up front for labour you hadn't yet done. Where can you do that today? Tell me one place you're able to go and get money up front for your labour. You see, they couldn't pay you up front because you'd have no incentive to remain. You see the point? If you're to work with me until the debt is paid, but I give you the money, you'd be gone with my money. But if I give your money to somebody else who gives me you, then I can go to that person if you do a runner. Knowing they had a homestead and a farm and they had a business and a family, they're much less likely to do a runner than you, because you don't have anything to stick around for if you're just a young son. So think about it. What does a man in Ireland get up front for his work? Nothing. He doesn't even get paid fairly. He doesn't get gainful employment. There isn't even enough houses in this land. And your government are committing grand larceny when they tell you that minimum wage is $12.70, when the Constitution says that minimum wage is gainful employment, by way of the enshrined right of the woman Let's repeat it. The government must endeavour to ensure that it never be as a result of economic necessity that the woman leaves the house and goes to work. Never. That requires the man to get more than he needs, because he has to be able to pay for his house, pay for his woman, pay for his children, pay for all their needs. We're not talking about holidays to Spain. That's not necessary. We're talking about all their needs, and still have a little bit left over for a rainy day or an unforeseen circumstance. We used to call it rainy day money. Now that is only a fair pay. That's what every man should be getting in this land, who is of an age where he can be a married man by law and bear children. If he's that age, he should be getting enough money to pay for his house. I mean, if a man's working full time and he's 25 and he has a beautiful wife, if he wants to give her a roof and a future, if he's not earning enough money, he has been put in a situation that is inhumane and unacceptable. You've put a man who's working full time, 40 hours a week, in a position where he cannot pay for his offspring and his beloved. But he's working full time. That man, therefore, should be in a position where he can get a mortgage. Why? Because it's cheaper than renting a house. He should be in a position where he can get a mortgage, put his wife under the roof, keep her at home, minding the children, building a house. The man builds it from outside at work, she builds it from inside at home. And they work together. And you don't have to listen to Beyonce, girls run the world or anything like that. And that meaning you have to wear a suit and look like a man, or shake your bum somewhere in a club. Girls already ran the world from home, knitting scarves. So the point remains. Blessings, Connor. Good to see you. The point remains. In Ireland, under the enshrined right of the woman, the government must endeavour to ensure that it never be as a result of economic necessity that the woman leaves the house and goes to work. Under that, the implied right is that the man will have enough money to look after her, unless it would be reasonable to think that the government would be paying for every single woman in Ireland who has a child not to have to go to work, whether she's single or in a relationship. Obviously, that's not what people are, that's not the meaning of it. That's not the spirit or the meaning of that enshrined right. The meaning is that the man, as breadwinner, will have enough money to keep her in that position at home with the children. Why? Because we've known, and so have the intelligent men that wrote the Constitution, have known that that's a pillar of society, the relationship with the child and the mother. Ask a man of age today whether he values the fact that his mother was at home. Now, nobody's saying that the mammy can't work. Let's get this straight. It doesn't say that the woman can't work. It says that it should never be as a result of economic necessity that she goes to work. If the woman goes to work, that's extra. That's a bonus, and it should be. It should be extra. But now the man and the woman are at work, and by the time they pay the creche and the transportation costs, they might be 30 euros better off. That's unacceptable. They're still only scraping by. They still don't have gainful employment accumulatively. Even when they combine their wages, they don't have gainful employment. That's unacceptable, guys. Sorry about the sunglasses. I have light sensitivity at the moment, so I have to wear them. So, the point I'm making to you guys is that slavery in the Bible was described as selling somebody into work, but they'd get their pay up front. So say I'm the father of the farm and my daughter gets married off, Now I'm down a set of hands because she used to work on the farm doing the lighter work. And the son is of age, he still has a lot to learn. I can spend a lot of time in my day teaching him, or I can get somebody else to do that. And I can sell him to that man, get money up front to cover me. Now I have the money from the man who bought my daughter off me in wedlock, and my son sold into slavery, and that will keep me going until my son works off his debt. Now the man can keep his house afloat, and the son can learn his trade on somebody else's time. Who's set up to train him, because he might have a much bigger operation and a lot more masters involved. So there are all these things going on. Think about it for a second. You have all these dynamics going on that explain slavery of old. All of these systems, people were working together to help each other. They had thought these things through, that these mechanisms had to be supportive of every given situation that might happen in human life. The death of a son, the death of a daughter being married off, even just normal things, not necessarily unforeseen death or things of that nature, or morbidity, disease, or disability, but just normal things like a daughter being sold off into wedlock, or because that's why the man used to come and give money for the daughter, because the dad would be 2 hands less on the farm, because everybody was working, but they were working on the homestead. But now in Ireland, we don't even have an expectation that when we're working the 40 hours a week that we'll have enough money to feed our children. So the point I'm making is that gainful employment in Ireland is constitutionally enshrined as minimum wage. Yet our government are telling us that minimum wage is $12.70. Is it? Is $12.70 enough to take care of your wife at home and pay a mortgage? That's just my question. Because if it isn't, the government are committing grand larceny, applying a false value to the least lawful amount that a man can be paid. This is huge crime. This is not stuff you say, oh, sure, look, the government's corrupt, what can you do? Put them in jail, according to the laws of Ireland, is what you can do. Because they're lying about the values of these set amounts. In terms of, is minimum wage a numerical value? Not principally. And what I mean by that is the amount of money has to satisfy a function, doesn't it? Because there's no point in arbitrarily picking a number out of the air if nobody can live off it, right? But that's what they've done. They have arbitrarily picked a number out of the air that sees people live in a home with their mammy till they're 30. That sees young women under pressure to kill their offspring because they haven't got enough money. This is not an acceptable dynamic in any society. This is barbaric. This is setting people up to slaughter their young. It's inhumane. This is infanticide. It's calculated infanticide. That's being implemented economically and governmentally and legislatively and unacceptably. And so slavery is not even the standard that an Irish man is at now. He's much less than a slave. He's just a well-dressed, well-fed slave. Why? Because Satan doesn't care whether you're well-dressed or well-fed. He cares where you're going to spend your eternity. He cares what's in your heart and your mind, not what's on your flesh and in your stomach. It is not what goes into a man that defiles him, but what comes out of his mouth. So he doesn't care what goes into you, only that it might make you sick, but not fully sick until he's conquered you. Not trying to kill men's flesh, he's trying to get them to use it wrongly to increase their eternal harm. You see, the devil is a divide and conquer strategy. That's what death does. It divides the cell. Decay, corruption, and division of cell. Flesh back to dust. And so Satan is the exact same thing implemented infrastructurally within societies the earth over. He is a divisive tactic. He is a stratagem implemented at governmental level because therein lies the access to franchise out the model internationally. So what we have to do is say, well, you know what, we have certain precepts in law, and right now they're being trampled under the foot of the Freemason. The Freemason got into government, and his name is Michael D. Higgins, and he is saying to the Irish people right now that if he's found in misconduct, he cannot be held accountable by the courts of Ireland. And if you think I'm making that up, Google it. Now, one might say, well, he didn't actually say that himself. Listen very carefully now. Michael D. Higgins' role is custodian of the Constitution. His Article 25 oath in the Constitution of Ireland says that he will uphold, implement, maintain, and enforce both the Constitution and the law in Ireland. His job is to check the constitutionality of bills prior to enacting them as law. That's the job of custodian or protector of the Constitution. So if he's not checking bills for their constitutionality as a prerequisite condition, obviously, guys, he's not doing his job. Can a mechanic be a mechanic without opening the bonnet? No. Can Michael D. be the custodian without checking constitutionality of bills? No. Why? Because he can't uphold the Constitution if he's not sure that the bills are in agreement with it. That takes the testing of the constitutionality of the bills. So if Michael D. isn't disagreeing with legislation, he agrees with it because he's in the position to disagree with it. That's his job. Do you understand now? So, no, he might not have said it himself, spoken word, but his position maintains it. And that is as good as speaking it himself, because he agrees with it. So because Michael D. Higgins is in the seat of president, and there's legislation in existence right now that he hasn't opposed, that says if he's found in misconduct, he cannot be held accountable before the courts of Ireland. Because he hasn't removed that legislation, he agrees with it. And that means that he is breaching his oath of office. So that legislation has to be removed because it is most certainly unconstitutional, and he knows it because he studied in constitutional law. So he is entertaining legislation that opposes his own office. That means he's an imposter and a traitor and a tyrannical dictator, representative of Freemasonry and not the Irish people. There are other legislations that say Michael D. doesn't have to check as a prerequisite measure the constitutionality of legislation. Well, when are you going to check the constitutionality of legislation? After you sign it into law? How many years after? 10? There is legislation in existence since 2006, which I brought before the High Court of Ireland on behalf of the Irish people a couple of years ago, which tells guards they can prosecute in court and represent the evidence of other guards in their absence when our Constitution says they can't, and the High Court also ruled that they can't in recent years. So there are still legislations in existence because the ones who put them in place don't want to show the people that they have access to have their writings removed. They want to appear strong in their weakness. They want to appear right in their wrongness. But the Constitution of Ireland says that a guard cannot play prosecution because he has to remain impartial, innocent until proven guilty. He cannot operate in civil matters. He has no jurisdiction. He cannot represent another guard's evidence in his absence. Why? Because he has to be the the accumulator of that evidence to represent it in court, because he's held personally accountable for the accuracy of his admission. So these legislations are clearly unconstitutional. We brought them before the High Court. They said they checked them, and then they abandoned checking them midway. Clearly, they knew that they were unlawful and didn't want to show the Irish people that someone like myself, just an average citizen in Ireland, could have a legislation removed by bringing it for investigation. Now, they prepared for that court case. Barristers of law, the state barrister, a whole lot of them prepared for over a year. They kept kicking it down the line. We need more time to prepare. They must have been very well prepared by that stage. Maybe they were so well prepared they were unwilling to proceed because of their findings and the implications of them. That's much more likely. So they abandoned the test, and then the Court of Appeal were to judicially review that abandonment, because arrogantly the state wanted to overthrow my acquittal when I was wrongfully imprisoned for a month and told I couldn't speak for 2 years in a public place because I sang a hymn with Jesus in it. And people had called me homophobic and racist because they didn't understand what I was talking about at all. Now, if you're going to call somebody racist because they disagree with, in principle, Islam, then you haven't understood that Islam has people from all around the world. All around the world. Islam have people from all ethnicities. Islam is not a race, religion. You can't call somebody racist because they don't agree with Islam. That's just ignorance. But it was entertained by the court and written into the local newspaper. Why were you arrested? I was arrested, Conor, because I was placed under a civil order, which, by the way, was found unlawful in the High Court under Miss Justice Siobhan Phelan. I was totally acquitted of it. I was wrongfully imprisoned for a month and they didn't give me any compensation. To give you an idea, in America, it's £6,000 a day for wrongful imprisonment. I would be due £180 sterling for the amount of time I spent in prison, and I didn't get a penny of restitution or compensation or reparation from Miss Justice Siobhan Phelan in the High Court. The same woman who in the same case abandoned the testing of the legislation that saw me imprisoned wrongfully for a month. So corrupt. So the reason I was arrested was because of an unlawful civil order that said I couldn't speak in a public place. And there I was singing as a hymn with the name Jesus Christ in it, which appears in the preamble of our very own Constitution, by the way. In the name of the most holy Trinity, from and to whom is our final end, all actions both of men and states must be referred. We the people of Eire humbly acknowledging all our obligations to our divine Lord Jesus Christ. How a member of An Garda Síochána was allowed to bring evidence, the sum of which was we found Mr. Tallon singing a song with Jesus in it in the public place. I kind of went, and? But they denied me bail and I ended up in prison for a month. For a month. 2 weeks in quarantine, 1 night in a strip cell, 2 weeks in a landing full of people with mental illnesses, a landing for the vulnerable, and most of them were heavily drugged. I think I got 1 shower in that month, maybe 2. And they wanted to assess me with a psych. And I literally had to tell them, I do not want to avail of your services. And then a lady was hiding behind the door writing down what I was saying anyway. And I said, I don't want to engage with you guys. What's she doing over there? Here she was behind the door writing down what I was saying. They were trying to have a sneaky session with me. It was ridiculous. So that's the reason I was arrested. No good reason is the answer. So anyway, the point is that the Constitution of Ireland is very explicit that the President, as custodian of the Constitution, should check the constitutionality of bills prior to their enactment. It's absolutely disgraceful, Connor. Absolutely. It was barbaric treatment, like because I have new dietary requirements since we spent time together all those years ago, Connor. Um, from about when I was age of 30, I got sick. I have some kind of an IBS situation going on, and it's sort of continued since then, and it hasn't really gone away, and I haven't been very well, But I was in the prison, and I was basically living off jam and honey and tea and some fruit that I could get off of them, and it was pretty ropey for a month. I lost a good bit of weight. Wasn't really getting my daily calories at all. I don't know what I would have done if I had meant that I was doing a 7-month prison sentence, because that's what they were trying to have me do. But anyway, I got bail eventually and was acquitted of the charges. So just ridiculous stuff altogether. But barbaric treatment, really. And went to the High Court and I was acquitted of all charges, but the judge presiding didn't make any restitution or compensation, and she's duty bound by the Constitution to do it. But they're just so bold in their crimes in Ireland because nobody will hold them accountable. They don't care about the law. Just look what Michael D. Higgins is doing. Like, Michael D. is saying, and I've nothing personally against the man, we should hold our officials accountable to their oaths of office and to the duties that they have towards the people of Ireland. I mean, it only makes sense. But just to address Connor's last message, fair play for carrying on and not giving up like many would have. Yeah, it's difficult. Like, we all have different aptitudes for kind of and moving forward, but it's something that I couldn't really quit on, actually, and I wouldn't have anyway, but I couldn't because, when it's your name and it's, you've been imprisoned and you have to attend a court case anyway because your name is in it. And like, my name was actually in it because they were trying to put me in jail for 7 months. But yeah, I persevered, and I appreciate that. Thanks for recognizing that. But it's tough, But because whenever you go up against people in power, they have a way of kind of crushing your life, gloves on, you know what I mean, and from a distance, and because of their affiliations and who they know in power. Because men in power don't tend to be on their own in power; they have friends in power as well. So they can make your life a real misery, And they have hindered my life, and I could get into that, but it's not really what I'm here to do. I'm not really here to complain about the mistreatment that I went through. It's more to do with how we should hold people accountable going forward for our children's sake, Connor, for the Ireland to come's sake. It's not about us anymore, especially myself. I'm 40 now. I mean, I've had relatively ill health since I was 30, so I haven't had a good time of it. But and I'm still in pretty bad health, I keep moving and I keep busy. I play music and I busk a little bit and I do a lot of painting, which is a good outlet for me. So I'm keeping busy, and I hope you're well as well, Connor. I was only thinking about you the other day when I saw the new SEAT. I was wondering, were you still working there? But it's a difficult situation because we have an onus and a responsibility to expression for the sake of our children, especially when it's starting to really put the squeeze on them. And, it really does run the risk of the work that we put in and the value that we accumulate by our life's work, meaning very little to them because of inflation, because of the cost of living rising so quickly. The money that we would leave them would be of little value to them by the time they come of age and are buying a house themselves. So we have to ensure that the minimum wage is of an adequate amount so that they can have the independence that we enjoyed and the home's life that we enjoyed, Connor. Like a mum that cooks for you, and you have a great one of those. A mum that cooks for you and your favourite meal at home. All of the memories that we'll have as old men of our mammies. we have to make sure that the same homestead environment is available, that, you know, the homely environment is available to our children as well. Because if it's not, imagine how cold the world it will be. It's already getting that way. You know, they only know their mammies when they petting donkeys with them at the weekend. And the mammies and the daddies are doing their best, but they're butter over too much bread. You know what I mean? Hope you sort your disability allowance out. Yeah, so do I. I've applied for it, and I'm waiting on an updated doctor's letter. Sorry, I have a headache because I have a problem with my eye at the moment. I don't know what it is. I have to go to the doctor tomorrow. Falling apart, I feel like. But yeah, I've applied for that. It was disallowed initially, but I've appealed it. And I think I have a solid case because they misrepresented the legislation, actually. But anyway, the point I'm making is that we have to persevere. We have to keep our government from making slaves out of us, because that's what they've done. And I'm not being a drama queen. I'm not being, dramatic or over theatrical. I'm actually just calling it out what it is. If the government are telling you that minimum wage is $12.70, and they're telling us, and minimum wage being defined as the least lawful amount that somebody can be paid in a job, they're lying to us, because the least lawful amount, that somebody can be paid in a job is gainful employment. And that's not $12.70. Everybody and their cat knows that. $12.70 is not going to pay for your mortgage. It's not going to pay for your children. It's not going to pay for your wife to stay at home and run the house. $12.70 doesn't do that. So if $12.70 doesn't, in Ireland, ensure society to have that touch up and the guidance that it's formative to a man, and therefore the society. So if that is denied by way of an economic deficit, for no other reason than the government are targeting the family and trying to divide it so that they can corrupt the child's mind down in the creche and reduce the amount of exposure the child has to the parent, to sever the connection of the heritage of Ireland and the future of Ireland, then we have to resist it and stand on our constitution that our granddaddies gave us to defend against these types of government and try and trash us and our houses. And they don't do it with the gun. They're too coward for that. They do it with the pen. And they misrepresent the laws to do it. And they write legislations behind our backs. That's what they do. They don't follow the administrative procedures and protocols that they should be. So we have to stand on our constitution and not cower and say, no, we're not going to bow to this. We have a constitution and you should be following it because we're expected to. So whenever you go into the Court of Appeal in Ireland and they're saying, this legislation is presumptively constitutional. Well, can we presume that I'm wearing a beanie right now? No, we can't. Why? Because you can see that I'm wearing a beanie. So if you can see that I'm wearing a beanie, you can't presume that. My point is, presumption means the lack of the evidence. Now, when it comes to the Constitution, we don't lack the evidence of the Constitution. You download it on your phone right now. It's not very big read, and you get it in about 30 seconds if you have fibre optic. It's not difficult to get the Constitution, therefore it's available. And if the evidence is available, the presumption cannot remain. So no court in this land can tell us to presume on the constitutionality of legislation. But they're doing it. The Court of Appeal are doing it, and therefore they're committing treason. Now, my point to you is that if Michael D. Higgins is custodian of the Constitution, and the Court of Appeal are telling us that something is presumptively constitutional, it doesn't really line up, does it? Michael's not doing his job if the court are talking like that. So there's a breakdown in our system, there's a breakdown and a compromise in the Office of President and in the courts of Ireland, from High Court to Court of Appeal, from jurisdiction district to jurisdiction circuit to jurisdiction higher courts. All of that stuff is going on. They're not doing their jobs. They're a cabal conspiring together to prevent the proper implementation of the Constitution of Ireland because they hate Ireland and its future and are trying to destroy it. And that's why they're not paying the man enough. Why? Because if the man has enough money to rule his roost, he can hold the government accountable because he doesn't need them to keep his house. the government compromise you financially so that you need them to pay your bills, then they call the shots. So we have to say, no, 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 no. Minimum wage is not 12.70. It's gainful employment. And if you can't ensure that, you're sacked. Because it says under the Constitution, under the family, the government must endeavour to ensure that it never be as a result of economic necessity, a lack of money, in other words, that the woman leaves the house and goes to work. It's like saying, you have the right to stay at home and educate your children and decide their religion, but you don't have the means to. Do you see what Granddaddy, who wrote the Constitution, was thinking? The only way he can defend his granddaughter is to ensure that the government have to enforce the implementation of gainful employment for her husband. And that expectation has to be enshrined under the woman's rights to preserve the man's rights and hers. And that was genius. It was an intelligent move. Not genius, but intelligent. And it should have been observed by Michael D and by the courts and the current government. And if they had the understanding that they claim to have by way of their learnedness and their degrees in colleges and institutions, then they wouldn't be lacking the understanding and using terminologies like minimum wage for 12.70. Instead, they would be saying gainful employment, so that you'd know what it meant, and they wouldn't be keeping you in ignorance, so that they can divide your house. And that's what's happening, and that's what I'm bringing to the people. I do it on a weekly basis. I do it some days on a daily basis. It depends, and I won't back down from it. I won't tire, as long as the Lord has given me time on the earth and a voice and the ability to walk up and down the street. I will be talking about it, because the gainful employment right of the man in Ireland is a military safeguard of an economic sort. Don't lose sight of that. The man in Ireland has to have an expectation from his government that he will be paid gainful employment for his work. If he isn't, he's less than a slave in his own house. Resist it, Ireland. I love you deeply. Blessings in Jesus' name. A holy kiss. Have a nice evening. Thanks for engaging and listening. I love you. Bye-bye.